Shabbat Shalom. This morning I want to talk about the power of stories. Is there anyone who doesn't know the story that our student Rabbi Emanu-El chanted so beautifully this morning? The one in which the plagues escalate in severity and discomfort and are delivered in graphic detail? The one with Pharaoh and his unrelenting, hardened heart, and the ultimate sorrow which shatters his heart and his will, which make it possible for the Israelites to leave their enslavement, worship God, and move toward the freedom that every human is due. The Exodus is our story. Even though we did not experience it firsthand, it still defines us, however many generations have transpired since it occurred. When David Ben-Gurion stood before the UN in 1947 to argue for the creation of the State of Israel, he used this very story to make his point. He said 300 years ago, a ship called the Mayflower set sail to the New World. This was a great event in the history of England. And yet I wonder if there is one Englishman who knows at what time the ship set sail. Do the English know how many people embarked on this voyage? What quality of bread did they eat? Yet more than 3,000 years ago, before the Mayflower set sail, the Jews left Egypt. Every Jew in the world, even in America or Soviet Russia, knows on exactly what date they left, the 15th of the month of Nisan. Everyone knows what kind of bread they ate. Even today, the Jews worldwide eat matzah on the 15th of Nisan. They retell the story of the Exodus and all the troubles the Jews have endured since being exiled. They conclude this evening with two statements. This year, slaves. Next year, free men. This year here, next year in Jerusalem, in Zion, in Eretz Yisrael. That is the nature of the Jews. And even more than our nature is the power of a story. This one tells us about our ancestors' plight, how they faced it, and what their hopes were. Their hopes still remain our hopes. Their story is ours because it conveys our values and a history still shared by all Jews. In 2013, psychologists Marshall Duke and Robin Fivush of Emory University published a study about the stories that bind us together. They created 20 questions, which they titled the Do You Know Scale, which tested knowledge of things that a child did not know personally, but would likely have knowledge of, such as, do you know how your parents met? Do you know the source of your name? Do you know of an illness or something really terrible that might have happened to your family? In an article in the New York Times, Bruce Feiler expanded on this study, noting that every family has a unifying narrative, and those narratives take one of three shapes. The first, the ascending family narrative, is one in which the family arrives with nothing and achieves upward mobility through hard work, planning, and some luck. The second is the descending narrative, in which what was once a comfortable lifestyle, often called having it all, is followed by a denouement. The third narrative is a combination of both, which reflects the highs and lows of a family's path, and often ends with the gratifying refrain, "No matter what happened, we always stuck together as a family." According to the psychologists, no matter which trajectory the family stories took, the child benefited, exhibiting greater resilience when facing their own uncertainties, and seemed more successful overall. The researchers concluded that children who know their family stories were able to see themselves as part of something larger. And even more, they were able to take an active role in the progression of their family history by contributing to its next chapter. As Jews, could there be anything larger than reaching back to the Exodus to understand the value of freedom, and to Sinai to understand how we are to behave today in 2023? As Ben-Gurion noted, no matter where we live, Jews have a shared story which reflects both obstacles and achievements. Our liturgy reads, "The Exodus lasted a moment enduring forever." As the Haggadah instructs us to tell and retell the story, we are also required to feel as if we have personally left Egypt and are walking toward freedom, not only during Passover, but every day of our lives. Our ancestors reinforced the lessons by including Mi Chamocha in our liturgy, the crossing of the Red Sea, so that we might be constantly reminded of where we come from, and use that as a measuring stick, our guide and inspiration to work for freedom for all as we add our own chapters to the narrative. And so this morning I want to share one more story to our collective Jewish narrative as we commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Recently, I had the privilege of officiating at the funeral of Lester Tanner, who was 99 wonderful years old. As his family and I left the cemetery, I promised to always tell his story, which may already be well known to you. Lester, a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx, was drafted to fight in the Second World War. In the terrible confrontation which took the lives of so many, his company was overcome at the Battle of the Bulge. Lester was captured and became a POW. Another man, Paul, who was in the same company and would later become Lester's brother-in-law after the war ended, recounted their plight to Yad Vashem. Paul said, after they had been captured, they were forced to march for 4 days without food in the freezing cold until they reached a railway station. He said some men died on the way. At the station, the POWs were loaded into boxcars, and they traveled for several days, they didn't know how many, without food, to a camp where the Jewish POWs were segregated into special barracks with lice-infested mattresses and starvation food rations. Lower-ranking Jews were sent to a slave labor camp. Lester and Paul, among others, were soon transferred to a second POW camp instead for prisoners of all faiths, where they came under the command of another American, Master Staff Sergeant Roddy Edmonds, who was the highest ranking POW. And when the POWs arrived at this second camp, they were greeted with this announcement: tomorrow morning, at roll call, all Jews must present themselves. Of the 1,000 or so prisoners, between 200 and 300 were Jewish. When the morning came, Master Sergeant Edmonds ordered all of the men to stand together. No one was to step forward, he told them. The German officer overseeing roll call was frustrated by this united effort of defiance, and he declared, "You cannot all be Jews." Edmonds assured him, "We are all Jews." And even when the German soldier had held a gun to Edmonds' head, the master sergeant remained strong. He told their captor, "You'll have to kill us all, but then you'd be liable to be tried for war crimes." And the German officer walked away instead. We only know of this story of standing up to the pharaohs of fascism, told some 40 years after it occurred, because of Lester and later of Paul and other Jewish soldiers who had been saved by Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds. In 2016, his heroism was recognized by Yad Vashem as one who is righteous among the nations, an award presented to his son at a ceremony attended by President Obama. Lester and Paul and more than 1,000 others owed their lives to Roddy Edmonds' passionate assertion, "We are all Jews." As he spoke, all of the men in that POW camp who had fought against fascism and for freedom and democratic ideals could certainly lay claim to honoring Jewish values. In recent years, this story has become almost apocryphal. It exists within the larger narrative stretching back to the Exodus and to the oppression of the Israelites, which finds its resolution every time someone stands up for justice. To know this story gives us a bit more courage to do so in our time. Ben-Gurion used the words of the Haggadah to explain the Jewish message to the world. This year, slaves; next year, free men. As we write the next chapter of our people's history, may we honor all those whose stories celebrate and enrich our Jewish heritage. May knowledge of them strengthen the generations who follow us as our ancestors have strengthened us. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.